When I first entered the discipline of communication, the thing that captured my interest the most was conflict. I desperately wanted to find out how to engage in conflict in a way that it wasn't scary, that it could lend itself to growth, healthiness. I was looking for a script. If I said this and that and this other thing, that I could help better communicate my desires, and I could better understand the desires of the other person, and conflict would disappear. If you talk to people in the discipline of communication, that story is not uncommon. That it was this desire to find a script that initially pulled us to this discipline. And while that's not true for everyone, one of the things that I've learned is that there are no scripts. And this belief that conflict could be healthy, that it's normal, I still believe that. The way it ends up getting worked out in our relationships, though, doesn't always feel that way. What I want us to look at today is, how do we define conflict? If you've been paying attention this semester, we spent a lot of time talking about definition and meaning. So let's dive in to what is conflict. A textbook definition of conflict is that there is an expressed struggle, that it is communicated in some way. Now, you might be sort of maybe a more avoidant conflict stylist, and so maybe this struggle is internalized or expressed in sort of passive-aggressive ways. But in order for there to be conflict, according to a textbook definition, there has to be some expressed struggle. This struggle takes place between two or more people who are interdependent, who need something from each other, who rely on each other for something. And that these two people or more who are in this struggle have incompatible goals. Now, when we talk about goals here, there's this idea in the discipline of communication that we are social creatures, and that our goals often are social goals, that they're goals of having a relationship or being loved or finding connection. They don't have to be just task goals, but they can often be relationship or social goals. So, an expressed struggle between interdependent parties that have incompatible goals. They also have to have scarce resources to accomplish those goals. So maybe those are financial resources. Maybe it's energy or time. It doesn't just have to be one type of resource. But lots of different things could fit into this definition. And lastly, that there is perceived interference, that the other person that you are in conflict with is making it harder for you to accomplish those goals. So let's look at an example. Let's say that you are a new employee. You are in an entry-level position along with several other entry-level positions. Now, when you are in an organization, there is automatically some layers added to the relationships that you have with people in that organization. You're interdependent on one another. No one in an organization really functions in a silo. They need something from other people in order to accomplish their tasks. Maybe those are customers or a boss or somebody in another department, but there is going to be interdependence. Let's say that you're working on a project that requires the use of a specific space in your organization, maybe a conference room. And when you go to sign up to use that conference room, there's nobody else signed up to use it. And so you add your name to the schedule. And The day of your event comes and you show up and someone else is in the conference room. Now we have incompatible goals and scarce resources. There's only one conference room. You need it. That's your goal. Someone else is there. They must have a goal that has caused them to use the conference room. Now, according to the textbook definition, we don't have conflict yet because we don't have an expressed struggle and we don't really have interference yet. I suppose we could say that the other person using the conference room has interfered, but this idea would be more of an expressed interference according to the textbook definition. So you would have to knock on the glass or the door or open the door and ask them why they are in the conference room when you had scheduled time in the conference room. Now that might be a very direct way of dealing with this incompatible goals, but until we engage and express that struggle, we don't have a textbook definition of conflict. But how many of you felt like there was conflict back when you found someone else in the conference room? My guess is you probably felt frustration. Why did they do that? You had scheduled it. They didn't use the proper, scheduling tools to sign up for something that is a shared resource. Maybe you felt frustration. Or maybe we can look at this as, a more interpersonal conflict. We can think about your relationship with a sibling, where maybe there's definitely interdependence here in family relationships and in family systems. We would see those as interdependent, that the people within the relationships rely on each other for different things and they need one another. Maybe there's a goal of, maybe you have a goal of feeling accepted for who you are. Now that's not a task goal, but it's definitely a social goal that you want to feel accepted for who you are. And you have a sibling who argues with you incessantly about your beliefs or values, who doesn't seem to accept who you are. Now, from your limited vantage point, what do you think their goal is? Is their goal to hurt you? Is their goal to correct you? Is their goal to understand you? It's hard to know without actually having that conversation. But there are scarce resources. As time goes on and the arguments continue, the affinity that you have for one another is going to start to decrease. That's a scarce resource. The time that you have together is scarce. The emotional investment that you have is scarce. It will diminish. And maybe you feel interference, that this sibling is keeping you from feeling accepted and loved in your family. Does that feel like a conflict? It does to me. Once we express that struggle, our frustration, then we have the textbook definition. But again, if you've been paying attention this semester, we have spent a lot of time talking about the fact that meaning is not the same thing as definition. And we can understand the textbook definition of conflict, but as we've just illustrated, there are lots of things that feel like conflict that don't fit that textbook definition. That textbook definition doesn't have to be emotional. It doesn't have to feel all-consuming or that it's life or death or anxiety-inducing. And yet, when I think of conflict in my life, those are the sorts of things that come to mind. The question of what does it mean to be in conflict with someone else feels very different than what is conflict and the definition of it. I guess I want you to think about this idea of words having power. how we define something as conflict, when we define something as conflict, what have we done internally or in the relationship that might make it harder for connection and healing? When I define something as a conflict, or I make up my mind that I'm in conflict with someone else, I limit the relationship. I create boundaries and constraints around what I think about that person, how much I want to spend time around them, how I feel when I'm with them. And I can start to resent that person. I can start to avoid that person because I've defined something as conflict. I've decided we're in conflict here. Now, this is not a conversation about how we deal with conflict. That's a different conversation. I want to start a little bit before that. And when we decide that something is a conflict. Because if we can stop at that moment and say, what do I know about this person? What do I remember about who they are? Did they mean to hurt me? Are they a rational and reasonable person? Do they have experiences that I don't know about that maybe led them to react in a certain way? If we can start asking ourselves some of those questions, we can get to a space where we don't assume the worst. We don't define something as a conflict because we have made up our minds that someone meant to hurt us or meant to do something wrong. And instead, we could create an opportunity to dialogue and engage in a conversation. Your words have power. Don't let defining something as a conflict keep you from being able to engage and love the people who are around you.